Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Senate Chamber. Today is May 6, 2025 at approximately 1:40 p.m. Here in the Senate Chamber. Before I officially call this committee meeting to order, I wish to recognize the legislative staff that are helping us facilitate this meeting this afternoon. Directly in front of me, to my left, is the legal counsel, Jose Bermudez. To my right is the Jolene Tagamboil. She's the legislative assistant. To my far right is Jonathan Diaz, is the IT. Assisting us with the flow of the floor, the Sergeant at Arms, Benjamin Terlahi. And the gentleman sitting on my far left on the chair near Chair Magofnia is David Dimapon. He's our fiscal analyst. And the gentleman on the gallery is Mr. L.J. Castro. Is the PIO and responsible for the uploads of our meetings and photos that you see in our pages in Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So with that, I would like to officially call this Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting, Senate Committee on Fiscal Affairs, call this meeting to order. Today is May 6, 2025, at approximately 1:38 p.m. here in the Senate Chamber. And at this time, I ask Jolene to call the roll to effectuate a quorum.
Senator Ronnie M. Calvo.
Present.
Senator Manny Gregory T. Castro.
Stiga.
Senator Francisco Q. Cruz. Senator Jude Yoha Schneider.
Yay.
Senator Carl R. King Neighbors.
Here.
Senator Karina L. Magofnia.
Here.
Senator Donald M. Manglenia.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, all 7 members are present.
With 7 members present, we have a quorum to proceed with this committee meeting today. And without any objection, I would like to open any member to offer a motion to adopt today's meeting agenda. It's been motioned by Vice President Neighbors, seconded by Floor Leader Manglona. All those in favor to adopt today's committee meeting agenda, please say aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. The agenda for today's committee meeting is hereby adopted. Under item 4, public comment. This juncture of our meeting, we allow any member of the public to offer public and a testimony with regards to the agenda before the committee. And in this case, it's House Bill 24-17. And without any objection from the members, because there is a single subject legislation, and the entity that is being asked to appear before the committee members they are here, can we forego the public comment aspect and just ask the 2 individuals to join us on the stands so that we can further discuss the legislation before us? Any objection? No objection. At this time, Sarge, can you please assist Director Esther Ada and Mrs. Hofschneider to the dais? Good afternoon, Director. If you're gonna, once we recognize you, just go ahead and press when it's red. That means it's on. So at this time, as indicated earlier, the agenda is a single subject agenda, which is the House Bill 24-17 to amend 2 CMC subsection 2174 to provide the Commonwealth Ports Authority greater autonomy in managing its finances. And it's been passed by the House and it's been referred to Fiscal Affairs Committee. And because it is a very critical piece of legislation, we feel as members of the committee that we need to have this engagement with the entity to get more information as to what's the genesis or what's the impetus of having this legislation before the legislature. Just a brief history, and I stand corrected, Council. This is the first time that we've actually ventured into proposing, entertain a proposal of this nature. So because of that, we needed to make sure that we dot the I's and cross the T's before we render our decision as legislative members of the Senate. So with that, I'm going to recognize you, Director. And for the record, please state your name. And, and of course, Cheryl, please state your name for the record. And also, please take us through the motion as to why this legislation is before the legislature. And I recognize.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. My name is Esther Ada. I'm the Executive Director for the Commonwealth Ports Authority. Do you want me to go ahead with? Okay, so thank you for this opportunity for CPA to come before this committee to express our support for this legislation. I'd like to take you through the reasoning why we support this legislation. As you know, the Commonwealth Ports Authority's mission is to develop air and sea navigation to and from the CNMI to its fullest potential. It operates, maintains, and improves all airports and seaports within the CNMI. The authority operates and maintains 6 port facilities, which consists of 8 departments and a current staffing level of 199 employees. The CPA generates revenues from port users to fund operating expenses and debt service requirements. As with most of the CNMI, the pandemic and natural disasters the CNMI went through severely impacted the CPA revenues. During most of the pandemic period, CPA was able to keep operations in place with ARPA and Federal Aviation Administration grant funding, which has since been depleted. In late 2022, with operational grant funding depleted, the CPA board had adopted rate methodologies that would enable CPA to be self-supporting. Airline partners, however, indicated that those fees were too high and they might be forced to discontinue flights into the CNMI. In an effort to work with our airline partners, CPA introduced a temporary landing fee and terminal rental rate reduction program. This program offered airline partners the opportunity to avail of up to 4 months of reduced fees and rental rates. In October 2024, the authority again adopted rate methodologies, enabling CPA to be self-supporting. Once again, the airline partners indicated that these fees were too high and they might be forced to continue flights into the CNMI. During this time, the Honorable Governor Palacios also requested CPA to continue the temporary landing fee and terminal rental rate reduction program until September 2025. In return, the governor had committed the central government to assist CPA find the differential funding between the published and temporary fees and rates from October 2023 up to September 2025. And we appreciate the commitment from our governor with this much needed assistance. The current state of our tourism economy has contributed significantly to one of the economically challenging times in the history of CPA. It is well known that airline activity has not recovered to anywhere near pre-pandemic levels. Agreeing to continue the temporary landing fee and the terminal rental rate reduction program was difficult, but it was necessary. All tourism economy starts at the CPA ports. If there are no flights, there are no tourists. The implementation of the temporary landing fee and terminal rental rate reduction program reduced projected income by approximately 47%, dropping from 12 million to about 6.4 million. This projected income falls very short of the 16.5 million the airports need to cover debt payment, personnel, and operating expenses. The current cash position of CPA is dire, with only 2 months of personnel and operational funding available. CPA, however, is committed to continuing cost containment measures and continuously seeks programs to manage our costs. To date, as we all know, CPA is the only government agency that remains at a 72-hour per work week per period. This austerity measure and the fact that there have been no pay increases for the past 7 years have negatively impacted employee retention and turnover, affecting our employee morale. CPA is exploring other cost containment measures to reduce its operational costs, such as exploring renewable energy, reviewing the organizational chart and desk audits of positions to streamline our organizational structure, aggressively seeking grants we can apply for, freeing funds for additional operational needs, and reconfiguration of our terminal layout for the reduction of cooling costs. In addition to cost containment, we are also aggressively exploring strategies to increase aviation and non-aviation revenues. Working with consultants and industry experts, CPA is inventorying and assessing land assets at all 6 ports to determine their highest and best use, inventorying and assessing terminal space at all 6 ports for rental opportunities, seeking other types of concessions, and partnering with MVA to increase flights. Given our points, the CPA, both the board and the management of CPA, respectfully request the Senate's approval of House Bill 24-17, removing the restriction on using airport revenues exclusively for airport-related activities and seaport revenues exclusively for seaport-related activities. The bill does not modify or affect bond indenture, lease agreements, or obligations, and we remain bound by any other applicable financial and legal restrictions governing funding sources. Thank you for your consideration, and we are available to answer any questions you may have for us.
So, Small Director Ada, before I open the floor to any members, can you repeat that? You said chasing grants and aggressively exploring. You kind of went along on that line.
We are working with. We have a grant person on board, and we're working with consultants that we have to aggressively look for grants, other funding sources to help with our projected needs.
Okay, and so as the alternative energy options, right? Like solar panels, or
Yes.
you guys are exploring that.
Yes.
How far have we gone?
We're currently working on the request for proposal that we will be issuing out for interested companies who may be willing to work with us on that end.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll yield for now, and I'll allow other members to ask. Senator Dono Manglonia, recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. Just clarification. You said that you only had 2 months worth of funding for your operations or personnel? For personnel.
And operations.
And how much is needed to last for the rest of the fiscal year? So we're talking May, this month, May and June?
Right. A little over $6 million. It cost, including our $100,000 debt payment to GPPC, it cost $1.3 million a month to run CPA.
So you need another about 3.9 just for the remainder of the fiscal year, if that's
That's
what
just
I'm
for
understanding.
maintenance and, operations, which includes personnel.
what are the plans for the remainder right now? If this wasn't considered, if this legislation wasn't considered, what other options was CPA considering to cover the remainder of the fiscal year?
What CPA is doing right now is we're looking at the top and the bottom of our income statements, our balance sheets. We can't continue to cut without looking at the top, which is to bring in more revenue. So if this legislation wasn't to go through, then we would continue to do that. However, it would probably bring us to the point where we would have to reduce our personnel hours to 64 hours.
Okay. Mr. Chair, is this an open discussion or just on the particulars that were brought up earlier? Okay.
If it's gonna assist us with rendering a decision on the matter, then
Yeah,
I
thank you.
think it's fair.
How much do you have sitting in this Seaport revenue account?
Did you want particular? Because we have several different accounts. We have our regular working accounts, and then
The
we also
cumulative
have.
that would be used to, that is being affected by this legislation.
We've identified almost $11 million that we could tap into.
Do you have a year by year of how much was saved from, or what was the surplus?
The Seaport was averaging a little over $2 million.
Each year,
Yes.
and is that projected for next fiscal year as well? $2 million.
If anything, the projection would go up because the business activity at the seaports is on a growth pattern right now.
Okay. Sorry, going back. What's the total operational cost for the airport for one fiscal year? What was the 6.5?
That was the projected revenue for both FY25 and 26 if we are to continue using the rate reduction program.
Okay, and you need 1.3 for the per month, so times 12. That would be the operational cost.
More or less, yes. Yeah.
So somewhere around 15.6
Million.
million
Yeah.
in a year. So even if we were to act on this legislation, it will only cover for the remainder of the current fiscal year and next year, correct?
That's if that was the only source of income. There's still income coming in from the aviation and non-aviation.
Okay. How much more is needed to restore employees back to 80 hours?
For FY25, there's 10 or 11 pay periods left. That would be around 250,000. That's the difference.
250,000, and then for the whole year?
For FY26, it would be about 660,000
Additional.
additional.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Manglona. Recognize Senator Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, since we were talking about strategies, given what's going on with the
To bring them to 80
trade situation internationally, and the CNMI having a Jones Act waiver, and the fact that real estate at our ports are a lot more affordable than Guam, has the leadership at the airport and seaport looked into maximizing that advantage? Because I've spoke to some of like our wholesalers. I've spoke to people in the shipping industry, and kind of like encouraging them to utilize the CNMI as a hub for for certain industries. And it came back that it is very possible. Um, in addition, so that was one question, if we're looking into that route. Another is, for example, the incinerator. Looking at waste to energy, there are several EPA approved equipment that maybe the airport, because the airport, for example, provides a lot of the water, right, to the southern part of the, like a lot of the aquifers are in CPA property, but utilizing also the incinerator for waste to energy, and maybe powering the facility itself, whether it's at the airport, but also looking into that type of technology for the seaport, so that when ships come in, that's additional revenue. And then also like a fuel farm, because I noticed that we're relying a lot on the companies, like even other agencies like CUC. They're utilizing private companies, but they have the infrastructure to develop their own storage tank, which I think CUC is looking into, so that they can buy fuel in larger quantities.
We do that right now
thank
with
you.
the ARF, with the fire. We do buy our fuel in bulk. As for the incinerator, there are certain FAA limitations. We can only use that for airport waste. However, that would be a great idea to look into, if we could further it into waste to energy.
Thank you. Chair, you.
This is Masi, Senator Castro. Any other member we recognize? Senator Magofnia?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Executive Director and Mrs. Hofschneider. So, you had stated earlier that currently you have enough funding for two months, approximately 2 months.
Approximately.
Okay, and the average monthly expense for the airport is about 1.3, to include the payment to GPPC. Okay. And so I was looking at a citizen-centric report that was submitted to us for FY24, and I mean, obviously the seaport is for the last 3 fiscal years have been in surplus. Fiscal year 2022 was about 3.8 million. 2023 was 3.6, and then I'm sorry, FY22 was 2.6 million surplus. 23 was 3.8, and then 24 was 4.8. And so with this legislation, I guess so 1.3, where are we now as far as our revenues and expenses as of April 30?
For the seaport or all ports?
For both.
I did not bring a combined statement. I just brought seaport and
Okay.
airport.
So whatever you have, can you just share with us?
Fiscal year up to February only, our operating revenue is $4 million, $4.1 million. And that's broken down to $4 million for aviation and non-aviation. And then the other amount is interest income.
Okay.
Our operating expense to date is 4.9, almost $5 million. So our net profit is 854,000, and that's $2.3 million short than our actual revenue requirement for the
Okay.
year.
And so with an average monthly expense of 1.3, do you anticipate any reduction in that, given that there's a lot of flight suspensions in the next few months?
Yes, and aviation and also in non-aviation because of the pullout of DFS.
Right. So not only are the revenues affected due to the suspension of flights, but also the expenses would follow, right? Because there's not as many flights coming to the CNMI.
Not necessarily, because a lot of the expenses that we have are
I
fixed.
fixed.
Yes, for example, with DFS pulling out, we now have to absorb the utility charges that were once covered by
I see.
DFS. Additionally, the commuter terminal is opening, so that will bring up our power bill again.
So with that said, then now your monthly expense would be more than 1.3, because now you're absorbing, expenses that you didn't normally.
Anticipate,
Okay.
correct.
And how much are we looking at as far as the utility expense, the additional expense that you guys would have to shoulder?
I think they were averaging 30,000. 30,000 a month was the utilities being covered.
Is that including the DFS portion of it?
No, the
No,
DFS.
that's DFS.
That's DFS.
Right, but now that
Alone.
alone.
Yes,
Yes.
they were. DFS was covering the utilities for the space that they were occupying,
Okay,
and so CPA will now have to absorb that.
right. Okay, so it would be more than the 1.3,
Yes.
because the
Yes,
1.3 is your
potentially.
fixed right now.
Right.
And then with the additional expenses that you now have to absorb, it would be a little bit over
Correct.
that. Okay. Since there's a reduction in flights, is there any consideration for CPA to also reduce the hours for the employees that are no longer going to be needed to operate a normal full operation?
Well, CPA right now is really at the lowest point it can be as far as the number of employees that we need to keep the airport safe.
Got it.
So even though there's no flights, the airport, the runway, they still
They still
need
need
to
to
be
Maintained.
maintained, right? So we still have to have the same. I mean, if it comes to the point where we have to do a reduction in force, I mean, that is gonna have to be something that we take on at that point in time. But
I mean, sure, but so are there any contingency plan? Like, have you guys already put something in place that, I mean, you have enough to operate for the next 2 months, but I mean, and we're trying to expedite the legislation, obviously, because we see the importance and how critical this is to the airport. But short of that, if this wasn't in place, like, what would be the contingency plan for CPA?
I mean, in regards to reduction in force, that is something that we still need to discuss as management, and also, discuss with the board to bring it up to
Sure.
the board. And as the controller had mentioned, the airport needs to continue to operate. So there are there's a lot of
Yes.
maintenance that needs to be done. And, the other way is to maximize the efficiency of the employees, that
Sure.
we can reallocate where it's really needed.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your answers. Thank you. I yield, Chair.
This is Masi, Senator McGovnian, Director. Recognized Vice President, neighbors.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was wondering if you guys have done any preliminary analyses on the expected loss of revenue due to some of the announcements that have been made, to include the exodus of DFS Galleria and so forth, and how that's impacting your projections for the rest of the fiscal year.
For the pullout of DFS, we were proactive when we were doing our budget for FY25. So after December of 2024 calendar year, we did not include the DFS
Okay.
income. However, we did not anticipate the high
Cancellations of
amount
flight.
of the utility
Oh, yeah.
cost. Also, we do have plans to go back and look at the existing budget right now because of the recent announcements by T-Way and then, of course, Hong Kong. That's going to be close to, I would say, $500,000 in loss.
Total.
total.
And for the funding that you guys utilize for the seaport, um, what all is encompassed? So how much do you draw down per year? You said on average it was about 2 and change, and then it rose up to about 4 and change. So what are those funds primarily utilized for? Um, great.
Um, improvements. There are quite a number of improvements that are going on. The seaport right now has almost $7 million in improvement CIP contracts in place. And while quite a few of them are grant funded, the grant also has a percentage,
component?
match for that.
And so how much of your match, what would be your match obligation for the rest of the fiscal year? And if you do have that information for next year?
I don't have that with me, I'm sorry.
Okay. Is it, so 11 million is currently what your balance is for both?
No, 11 million,
Is,
you're talking about the available funding?
yes,
That's available funding that is not encumbered.
correct.
Right.
So,
Encumbered, we have, like I said, almost $17 million.
so how much is unencumbered from the seaport?
The 11
Yes.
million, yeah, the
So-
10.8 that we're looking
Yeah,
at.
so we're just rounding up to 11, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're looking to
Okay.
tapping in, yeah.
So of the 10.8, $11 million, add a clip of 1.3, possibly more per month, right? Would how long would you be able to manage, even given the ability to tap into the seaport funds? Obviously, you're losing $500,000. Is that a conservative assessment, or do you think that's par for the course?
It might be, I wouldn't say conservative, maybe a little bit, safer,
Okay,
yeah, safer number,
okay.
right?
So if in the event that the 10.8 million is made available, knowing that you need 3.9 to the end of the FY, and then you have $7 million, but in matching, right? So you have $7 million in projects, but there's a matching component. At what point have you guys made an assessment on at what point these matchings might be in jeopardy, and at what point would you also exhaust what
Okay,
available
I
funding you
understand.
have at the seaport?
Yeah, we have already reserved for all matching, existing CIP.
Okay.
However, if there is something that comes up in the future, that will require a matching, then that's something that we would have to look into.
Okay, so the $11 million is not inclusive of the matching, because that,
Of any potential matching,
Okay.
anything that's already, reserved for includes their matching share.
okay, understood. Now, how much do you annually get from, and I know you probably answered this already, but from the aviation side, from the airport, annually, the trends, if you don't have the number for this year, that's not a problem, but the trends, maybe 2 years, 3 years, what would you estimate?
Grant-wise?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, revenue generation
Oh, fees.
from the airport.
Oh, okay.
If you don't have the exact number, I won't hold your feet to the fire. I just want a roundabout estimation of, so I can kind of get it. You know what I mean? Basically, what I'm trying to get at is, obviously, we don't want you guys to fall out of compliance of some of the FAA components, right? Regulatory statutes and parameters, and I fully I fully agree with tapping into the money that you currently have liquid as the shortest route towards alleviating some of the stresses of CPA and addressing your financial needs. Um, my ultimate concern is if this money is made available, now you're putting everything into one pot, and at what point do you believe that you would exhaust the runway that allowing this $10.8 million to be made available for anything CPA would need to cover? How much runway would you have if that was made available?
Um, the first point I want to make, or I would like to relay, is this is not going to be the only source of income. I'm very cognizant of the fact that it's not a whole lot of money when you're talking about $1.3 million a month. My resolve, if this law goes forward, is to reserve the funds for personnel. That's the plan that we have moving forward. We know how important it is to keep, as our director had mentioned earlier, our staff hasn't had increase in 7 years, and we are losing employees quite rapidly. So they need some kind of relief,
Yes.
some kind of effort from us. I don't see us, the term kid in a candy store, that's not what
No.
we anticipate doing with this money.
Yeah. Okay. And so, in our offline conversation with some of the board members, there was discussion on the again potentially falling out of compliance with some of the FAA regulations, and you did mention that with regards to staffing, you guys need, though the operations aren't at 100% capacity, that doesn't necessarily have a direct corollary to the amount of employment that needs to be on board to maintain the facility, secure, safety, all etc. Right? And so my question is, have again, if this money is made available, how long? Where's your threshold until you begin to fall under that line where you need, this is the bare minimum, we need 60% of the people, or say you're at 70% employment of what you had 3 years ago, and that's as a hypothetical, but that's where you need to stay at right now. How long will this money allow you to stay at that threshold and hopefully not lose the amount of employees that you would need to keep the CPA operations open and not fall out of the compliance for FAA?
Right. The requirements for FAA are mostly going to be on the operational side, such as the operation of the runway, safety concerns. Okay, those are where we can't jeopardize or limit or stretch the amount of employees that are there. If it comes to the point where we do have to start looking within, it's probably going to be
So give me I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you provide us like a for instance, like what kind of employment, like what kind of operational components or employees do you need as to make, like these people cannot leave, like what are those positions?
I think it would,
or is it just like the maintenance of the airstrip? Is it the
terminal maintenance? Right.
terminal maintenance, the ARF, the ports police.
And are these all under the purview of CPA, or is some of this contracted out to a third party?
These are under
Under your
CPA.
purview,
They're all
okay.
CPA employees.
Patients.
I think what the comptroller is also alluding to is that when it comes to that point where we have to take a hard look at personnel, right? We will not, we cannot and will not jeopardize the safety security of the ports, both seaport and airport. Because we are talking about safety not only for our employees but also of the general public.
Sure. Now, the one last question I had, if you would, Chair. So, obviously, this isn't the first time that this money has been looked at as a source of reprieve, right? From the onslaught from U2 and Mancood and all, I mean, name it, right? For the past 6 years, we've been, as CPA has been dealing with just the precipitous fall in throughput, just the amount of passengers that come through the ports, but during, if you can answer, I don't, because I know some of you haven't been there, right? You guys haven't been there forever, but if you could, what would have been the reason, the rationale to have the funds bifurcated, separated into two different buckets?
I believe that the original intent was mainly due to the FAA grant assurances that we have. They're very specific that airport money must stay at the airport, and seaport money must stay at the seaport. Probably they would like to have that separation because of mainly the grant assurances. Now, we don't have that with the seaport right now, which is why this has become a possible way for the airport to move forward during this time.
Okay.
Right. Now, for the seaport, even though we're looking at tapping into that 10.8, the $11 million, that has been identified as available. It hasn't been encumbered. That's not to say, for example, we do have an allowance account, a maintenance and operation account reserved for the seaport. So if something were to happen, we wouldn't even have to go back to the 10.8.
Yeah.
So
that
we do
one's
have
clear.
the reserve, yes.
Yes, understood. Well, thank you for that, and I yield, Chair.
Thank you, Vice President Neighbors. Any member before I ask my second round? You're good. So just maybe just to update the committee. I do know that the board exercised authority to migrate some of the funds from the lease of the divert on Tinian to retire some obligations. Can someone or one of you elaborate more on what was accomplished doing such action? As far as the divert money when it was paid. I believe the board at the time, they used that to pay an obligation. So was that the bond, or was it a settlement of some sort?
There was more than one purpose that the money was used for. Some of the larger ticket items was arrears that we had, CPA had with CUC. That was a large portion of the money. And just projects that needed to be done. But it was put into a general account at first.
Okay, so there's nothing, you didn't retire any bond indenture or bond obligation or anything whatsoever?
Part of it, when they made the decision to pay off the bond, there was reserves, but this is one investment account. So to be able to pinpoint and say only divert funds were used to pay off the airport bonds, it wouldn't be possible to pinpoint that.
Okay. Do we still have, when is the maturity date for the airport's bond? I mean, are we looking at?
The airport bond is paid off.
So what other obligations?
Seaport still has bonds.
Is there, how many more years?
2031, I believe, they
6
mature.
more years?
Yeah. The balance due right now is 9.6 million on the two bonds.
Okay, so if we are to move forward with this legislation, it's not gonna jeopardize any of that nature, no? Or
The airport bonds have been fully reserved for,
okay,
So, the, that amount that we're looking at has not been included in that reserve.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll yield my time, and I recognize Senator Frank Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't gonna ask anything, but since divert money is raised, Director, that $17+ million that was left over from that divert negotiation, it's all gone.
I'll yield to to our controller. I'm sorry.
I asked this because I know we're not CPA, but we're part of the leadership of the union that we get involved in the negotiation of that to basically to improve our airport and seaport, most especially the retrofittings for the new building that I think the only time that we use that departure terminal is when that new airline came in, what do you call this, the Maran Southern. Other than that, we're hoping that departure terminal be completed, so we don't have to mix with the arrival site, because I've seen a lot of or I'm receiving a lot of information that especially people that bringing in contrabands, and it's very difficult to monitor when both departure and arrival is in the same area. Is there any possibility, do the board ever mention that some of that will be returned back to, so that we can finish our, I know that it's not part of this, but since the word is raised, I think this is my opportunity to ask this question.
When we
Is there any-
say we have about 2 months of maintenance and operation funding cash available, most of that would be what's left of the divert funds.
It would be nice if we try and complete that, so that it will be more safer for passengers departing or arriving. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Manglonia, Donald.
Thank you, Chairman. Please forgive me. I'm gonna kind of be all over the place here because I have different concerns about different issues. One is, what is the status of the apron at the Rota Airport? Every time I go back, it seems like the section that they close off keeps extending. It's becoming a hazard to those that have to check in or go to the airport. What's the delay with I don't know if NTP was issued, or what's the hold up with that?
I apologize, I did not bring the CIP updates.
Okay.
That can be,
We can provide that.
yeah, we can provide that
later.
from our CIP manager, Wendy.
Okay. Yeah, if you can please, so I can relay that to our constituents, because like I said, within the span of 2 weeks, that section has grown larger. The second question I have is Star Marianas paying anything at all while you guys are still in litigation? Is there any payment at all for any rental or for the use of the facilities right now?
Star Marianas is making certain payments. For example, hangar use, but as far as the terminal rental and the landing fees, no, they are not.
Are those tied to the litigation, both the terminal use and the landing fees?
They are.
Do you know when's the next date of any court hearings or appearances?
I personally don't have that knowledge.
I think there's a response due from CPA sometime this month.
Okay. But do you know if they are still assessing the fees to the passengers and are still being reserved in the event the court has decided? Is that something that you're privy to?
No, it's not. We don't have that knowledge if they're accruing for that.
Okay, thank you. One of an amendment I'm proposing, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, because like the vice president had mentioned earlier, off record, we spoke with the board members. I don't think I got a clear answer as to whether it is the board's intention to restore employees back to 80 hours as being one of the priorities, and so I'm hoping that we can include it as part of the language in the current legislation. Now, earlier you mentioned that you supported the legislation as it is written, but one of the proposal that I'm going to bring up to the members is that before anything else, if we allow for the use of the seaport revenues to help support airport operations, that the first thing that should be considered is the restoration of hours for all employees. Is that something that you would support?
Yes, we do support that, and it is, something that we have also discussed with the board, the restoration of the 80 hours.
And how did they receive that suggestion? Do you know if that was something that has been discussed during the board meetings, if that was one of their top priorities?
I don't believe it was discussed in the most recent board meeting. I think the Senate version had come to us right before the board met last week, so they did not have the opportunity to discuss it.
Okay. If we were to calculate and factor into the remainder of the current fiscal year as well as next year, the surplus in revenue for the seaport will be enough to cover all operations for both ports throughout next fiscal year, at least.
The surplus from Seaport?
The seaport revenue that we're gonna use, that this legislation will allow you to use to cover both ports' operation and personnel, and with the restoration of hours for all personnel, will you have enough between now and throughout fiscal year 26?
I can confidently say yes for FY 2025. We are re-looking at our FY 26 budget right now because of the recent departures of the airlines. Hong Kong, T-Way has reduced the number of flights. So for the rest of fiscal year 26, without any new surprises, I believe so.
Okay. Do you know if there are plans to increase the rates back up after September 25 if we still proceed with this current legislation?
No. In fact, the indication and the FY 26 budget that is being worked on right now is continuing with the reduced rates.
Okay. Sorry, Dave, did CPA submit the proposal already for next fiscal year?
Yes.
Would there be a revision because of all these changes?
The proposal or the informational budget that was submitted was using the reduced rates already.
But then will you be submitting a revised budget due to the revelation of what's coming from T-Way and Jeju?
To the legislature? If it's required, we will.
I mean, considering there's a huge change and there will be a huge change in your revenues, I would assume that's something that should be shared with the fiscal affairs in consideration for next fiscal year's budget. Another amendment I would like to propose to the members, but before that, to get your opinion on, is putting a sunset on being able to use seaport revenues. And I bring that up because right now we're not seeing any issues with seaport, and once we open the door, who's to say 2 years from now we're putting both ports at risk because of the lack, we're using both one revenue to support the other. But then, it'll also be a time to review it after 2 years if that's something that should be continued, or keep the status quo of how it's been working for the past couple of years.
I think with CPA, whether there's a sunset or not, I mean, we recognize, the need to have the enough funding for airport and seaport, but it will be something that we would definitely be looking into as to how much, longer do we need to have those two, have the seaport help support the airport, and hopefully, it won't be too long that we would be able to, the airport would be able to sustain its own operational costs.
Okay.
If anything, a sunset provision would be a push for
Yes.
our revenue generating strategies to go online faster than, or, as soon as possible.
Okay. And I also bring that up because earlier you mentioned interest income. Where are you getting that one from?
The money that we have on reserve for the bond requirements, that's where the interest income is coming from.
Okay. All right. Well, considering also how much in surplus the seaport gets, it's another thing for the legislature to also look into a possibility of investing some of that, right, in some of those surplus.
Yeah, they are invested. That's where the interest income is coming from.
But you mentioned it's on the reserve, but then the surplus portion,
That is part of our investment income.
how much are you looking at in interest income?
I don't have that exact figure.
Do you have a rough estimate? Are we looking at
Check on my,
the 100,000s a year, or at least what's the total value that's being invested?
About $43 million.
But then that will be reduced if
That's
we
airport
take
seaport.
out that 11 million, right?
Right. But
Okay.
keeping in mind, we're not going to take $11 million out of the interest-bearing account and transfer it to airport. Our intention is if it goes as I plan, as I request, we'll be limited to personnel.
So the interest income that you brought up is from the interest-bearing accounts,
Yes.
but not what I'm thinking of is more along the lines of stocks and stuff like that. Similarly to what MPLT does with their, and it's just a matter of giving the authority to invest it. So
there's different. We have bonds. When I say investment accounts, they're different. There's time deposits and there's also bonds.
all right. Okay. Thank you. That's all I had for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Manglonia. Senator Castro?
I do see the urgency of this. I mean, CPA is one autonomous agency, and wherever there's a shortfall, there's also opportunity to help each department, or whether it's seaport or airport. I did share the same concern with floor leader about like it can get out of hand in the future, but I'm sure we're not gonna get there with you guys at the helm. One question I did want to bring up is, given the amount of cruise ships that are coming in and military ships, is there a plan to kind of improve the seaport from a merchant perspective, like have concessions, and so that now with all the sidewalks, the infrastructure being there, you see these tourists via cruise ship or military ship walking more. So maybe in the future we can improve the seaport. I don't know if we can because of whatever exclusive contracts we have, but when we look at other destinations that are receiving cruise liners, it's a lot. It doesn't look like a warehouse or a shipping yard. I think the more of those vessels that come in, we really need to look at improving that, and maybe even having a terminal for Maniagaha Island. And then I know there's a dock that's kind of underutilized that used to have a restaurant there by Fish and Wildlife. I know CPA was probably approached, or the government was approached for looking into making that the Western Pacific Maritime Academy. I think they were interested in that specific dock for educational opportunities. And given the fact that we have all these pre-positioning ships, I really think that that's an opportunity there to get more of our local citizens employed in that industry, instead of recruiting from Florida or whatever. So I know that was 3 questions in one, but if you have any updates on plans in that direction, just wanted to hear from you guys. Thank you.
Certainly, we can take a look at that on any improvements for the seaport. I know that when there are military ships and cruise ships, there are some vendors that request to be able to sell there, just be present there. So that's a good idea that we can certainly think about.
I just kind of more like the infrastructure.
Yeah.
We don't, because if you look at all these other cruise ship destinations, and it's a nice entrance, there's nice shops, kind of like if you go to Maniagawa, it's not just a tent, there's an actual facility. So more in line with that, but just want to thank the both of you for your service to our Commonwealth, and thank you, Director, for accepting the job. And thank you to your family and your father for his service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just kind of thank you, members, for those great questions, and also to the two gentle ladies for their response. I know it's the goal is to get to the other side of 24/17, and this is the exercise that we deploy for us to get there. So on your 2023 Citizen Centric Report, there is a OLDCC grant through CBMA. What's the status of that? What are they doing basically for the airport or for the ports? What's their responsibility? I mean, if you don't have the answer, okay. The reason why I asked this because obviously the airport, especially the big island, Saipan, it's built years ago, and there's a lot of retrofitting that's needed. And I believe that one of the recommendations that I want to propose to Director is the ability to, how soon can you turn around the retrofitting of that, whereby if there's 6 bays currently, and there's only a certain central air conditioning, and even if you need only one or two, you need to power up the entire facility. I think one way to look at it is see how you can segregate the ones that are not necessarily being in use, so that you let your cost to with your energy cost would be will help definitely reduce it, hopefully. Also, there are some right now, unfortunately, we saw the closure of one of our legacy companies that have been with us for the last 4 years in the CNMI. But is there any plans to re-announce that for potential bidder? Or what's the turnaround time?
So we do have an invitation for bid out for temporary space for the DFS area. We're also working with the tenants they're actually leased brands from DFS. They have expressed interest to remain in that area, in the departure area. It's just a matter of them getting their infrastructure in place to get that going. So we do have a invitation for bid out, and we're also working with our consultants to on a marketing strategy and trends for a longer term concession for the airport.
Okay, I'm just running through with your citizen-centric, trying to, it says here there's a training on hold. Department's personnel job enhancement trainings were put on hold due to lack of funding since the pandemic. Has that been overcome already? I mean, we overcame that particular concern? We're doing trainings already?
We're doing training for required certifications.
But not necessarily beyond that?
No.
Okay. All right, sticking with, and I'm going to ask one last question. So I was monitoring the line of questioning by Senator Donald Manglona with regards to the potential amendments that we're going to be considering. Did you say you have no issue with the sunset provision proposal?
No.
No?
That would, yeah, we don't have.
Okay. We're good?
We're good.
Okay, so how are we doing? What's our bond rating, basically? You guys can disclose that as far as CPS bond rating?
BB.
BB? Is that?
The seaport, because airport is
okay, for
no
sure.
longer in existence.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, I would yield my time until, and I'll give the others. Vice President Neighbors.
Thank you, Chair. Just so, I think just so it's helpful for the committee, could you kind of walk us through some of the financial mechanisms that you've done to pull back and try to mitigate the loss, of revenue, or like you said, with regards to the training, it's only the required training, and I'm assuming that the reason why it's only required is because you don't have the money currently to go beyond what is bare minimum what you need to stay operational. So can you kind of expound on some of the other ways that you guys are trying to cost cutting measures, cost containment measures that you guys have implemented, so that we can better understand and not offer things to you that you guys have already undertaken,
Right offhand, I can say we have really focused in on our procurement, requiring numerous quotations, and then limiting like your supplies and for example, FY26 are your general supplies, they're going to be cut almost in half, 50%. So I'd like to say now is the time where you go to that cabinet and you dig way in the back and you're going to find your supplies so that, we can stretch the dollar a little bit more. And then we do have, we are working with some consultants right now, and we're at the point where everything is just about to come to the table where we can start taking these ideas that we've been brainstorming as far as revenue and cost cutting, and we're almost at the point where we're ready to sit down at the table and decide which one is most beneficial to the airport, the Seaport Airport.
And if there were to be a sunset provision included into into the language of the legislation, what would your recommendation be, being that you guys are the ones who are the custodians and are using the finances? You guys know best how, what, obviously you wouldn't have asked if you didn't know exactly what you needed the money for. And so what would your suggestion to the legislative body be as to a timeline where you would feel comfortable to revisit the separation of these accounts? Because just as a background, as we were dialoguing about a sunset provision, one of the things that came into my mind was it just at face value is very difficult to really put any kind of timeline as to when we're gonna see, well, first an uptick in air traffic, and then really I think the goal is to get back to or surpass pre-pandemic, pre-U2 levels, right? And so that, just as a lay person not being in CPA, it's a very difficult target for me to even envision. And I wonder if you guys have some insight as to that kind of forecasting that you could provide us, because I'd imagine that would play a big component of your decision as to when you would now need to pull away and go ahead and put the seaport money back to the seaport and airport money back to the airport.
You could suggest a midpoint of 3 years. And I say that because a lot of our income strategies that we're looking at, they take time to get into place. Just the whole procurement process, and the availability of resources there, that takes a whole year right off the bat just to start doing that. And we're not yet at the table where we're going to decide which routes to go, which would be most beneficial to the ports. So I think a midway point would be 3 years.
Thank you, and the committee will take that into consideration as we deliberate. And thank you for the answer, because again, we don't necessarily want to pick arbitrary numbers and then have to come back in a year when we know full well this is a moot point. We need more time to really understand the trajectory of, what's happening, not only locally but geopolitically, because that has been one of the biggest impediments, right, as to our current tourism market. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Vice President. Any other member before we close this portion of our meeting, and then we can discuss on the. Anyway, so no more. Okay, so that concludes our discussion with the agency. We're going to continue on as committee. Well, we thank you for participating. We certainly appreciate all the response and the guidance that you guys have provided. And we're going to take a short recess, a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back into our committee meeting. Thank you, gentlemen, for thank you for your participation this afternoon. Again, we're discussing House Bill 24-17, and if there's no objection from the members, at this time the chair recognizes Mr. David Demupan, our fiscal analyst, to share some of his observation with regards to the exchange that we had this afternoon with the agency, plus as it relates to the bill in discussion. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Good afternoon. My point here is, when we look at the flexibility of this bill to allow the airport revenue to be used by the seaport and vice versa. Seaport revenue can be used at the airport. My point here that I'd like to point out is at the seaport right now, the seaport bond, there's two bonds right now there that are still outstanding. The 1998 series and the 2005 series, right? They're still outstanding, and I believe, as stated by the controller, it's about 6 more years remaining. So in the indenture agreement, all revenues at the seaport to pay for the bond are pledged in the future. That means they are locked in to the bond is expired or mature, right? So with this plan to allow the seaport revenue to be used at the airport, when that section has been locked in for the next 6 years, so I'm trying to identify what revenue are we talking about that can be used with this bill that can be applied at the airport side from the seaport side, because all the gross revenues are now locked in for the next 6 years, as stated in the bond indenture, and that's my point. How much? What are those revenues or fees that can be used to fund the airport from the seaport side, when all the revenues right now at the seaport are being pledged in the bond indenture for future use payment to pay the bond? That's my point here. I want to clarify, members. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions?
I could
Senator
be
Carl?
mistaken, Chair, but in defense of Dave, no, the way I heard it or understood it was the 11 or 10.8 was aside and separate from the money that they had already put aside for the bond. Now, if that's not the case, then we need to clarify. But I believe that when we were asking the line of questioning, of how much runway you have and what is it that you're using the money for, it was my understanding that money for the bond for the seaport was already encumbered. When she identified the 10.8, that was everything that was unencumbered. Yeah.
Let me clarify.
Okay.
Those are unrestricted and available, and I understand that those are reserves available, but those money are derived from the seaport side that I would assume have been pledged for the bond payment at the seaport. So even though it's readily available for use, I'm assuming because the indenture says all revenue at the seaport are pledged in the future. So in other words, when there's reserve available, that reserve constitute future revenue that had been already realized, and that payment will be used to pay for the bond. I mean, that available money will be used to pay for the bond. That's what I'm trying to.
So we need to clarify then.
Yeah.
Well, if I may, Chair, I think that's why there's a provision that says as necessary to comply with applicable federal grant assurances, bond indentures, and other binding legal obligations. If they stray away from that, then they're in violation,
Yeah.
not just of the bond assurance, but because of the
Yeah, but
the
that's
law.
my point there. Is that is there a mechanism down at the seaport or at the airport to determine in terms of identifying those revenue that should have been restricted, before they can be used for the airport?
I understand,
seaport?
but
Yeah,
again,
I mean,
that's on them to determine.
Yeah, but that's the risk that we're taking, but I'm not really sure whether they have that mechanism now in place to identify which part of the gross revenues are already earned that can be used for the seaport payment or cannot be used for the seaport payment. And those that cannot be used for seaport payment are the ones that can be used for the airport or the seaport.
I think that's a very good point, Dave, and I think they have to be held accountable to the highest degree, because I don't think they can afford at this juncture right now to fall out of compliance, because look at them. This is, I don't know, but in its history, I think this legislation, it's the second legislature that they created this statute, and this is 24th that we're exploring this option. So I'm certain that the concern that was raised by our fiscal analyst is well taken by the members, and I do know that they're also they have a fiduciary, their highest fiduciary level to make sure that they don't fall out of compliance of their bond obligation. So with that, any further comments before I call for adjournment of this Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting? Council? And it is understood that there will be an amendment to qualify for a sunset provision of the mover of the amendment is the Honorable Donald Manglonia. So okay. So please have the please have the amendment ready for the session. I believe the president had took the opportunity to place this on bill calendar for Friday. Council, any other? Jolene? With that, and any motion to adjourn this committee meeting?
Motion to adjourn, subject to the call of the chair.
There's been a motion offered by the Vice President and second. All those in favor to adjourn this committee meeting, please say aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. The Fiscal Affairs Committee meetings hereby, stands adjourned, subject to call. Thank you very much.